As the king and queen leave the thrones and head for the exit of Westminster Abbey of the coronation ceremony, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes.
The royal court had witnessed cold disagreements, private rivalries, and carefully concealed humiliation. But no one was prepared for the moment Queen Camilla turned toward Prince George and delivered a vicious public rebuke that left the young heir frozen before the entire room. Then came the sound nobody expected: King Charles striking the table, rising from his chair, and losing control as generations of royal discipline shattered in a single furious command. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. George had entered Windsor Castle expecting only to watch and learn. The evening court gathered senior royals, courtiers, and household officials in one chamber. A royal court is the circle of family members and advisors surrounding the monarch in official business. His presence mattered because William and Catherine wanted him to approach duty slowly and with care, without losing his childhood. Camilla continued the ceremonial presentation. A ceremonial presentation is a formal introduction following a fixed order. George misunderstood a signal and stepped forward before his name was announced. The mistake lasted seconds and harmed no one. Yet glances crossed the room when he interrupted the queen consort. Camilla refused to let it pass. She turned toward the boy and accused him of behaving like a spoiled child who believes the crown already belongs to him. Her voice hardened as she ordered him back into place. Then she said he had embarrassed the king before the entire court. George went pale. He lowered his eyes and fought gathering tears. Catherine moved toward her son, while William gripped his chair until his knuckles whitened. The prince knew why those words were dangerous. They did not correct a mistake. They attacked the child's character and his future within the family. Charles watched his grandson struggle to remain still. Shame crossed the king's face, then vanished beneath fury. He struck the table and ordered Camilla to stop. The sound cut through the chamber. He declared that no rank, title, or marriage gave anyone permission to humiliate George in his court. Camilla remained standing. She refused his command to leave and insisted the boy needed discipline before dangerous expectations took root. Her defiance transformed a family rebuke into a challenge to the monarch himself. Charles stepped toward her. William moved between the Queen and George. In that instant, 3 generations chose their positions, and everyone understood this was no longer about etiquette. But before Charles could decide whether he was defending a frightened grandson or confronting his own wife, every person in that chamber had to face what Prince George represented to each of them. Prince George was not merely a child standing beneath the weight of an angry adult's words. He was the future of the monarchy, William's son, Catherine's greatest concern, Charles's living connection to everything that would come after him, and Camilla's reminder that royal history would eventually move forward without her. Inside that room, every protective instinct and private insecurity collided, turning one cruel sentence into a battle over family, legacy, and belonging. Catherine moved first when the chamber emptied. She knelt beside George and asked whether he was hurt, but the boy whispered that he was fine while his hands trembled. The Princess of Wales, the heir's wife and mother of the next generation, understood why that fear mattered. She and William had introduced duty slowly, hoping responsibility would never become terror. George understood the crown. The crown meant more than jewelry. It represented the monarch's authority, duties, and succession. William wanted his son to respect that burden without losing his childhood. Catherine wanted the same, yet Camilla's words had made service sound like punishment. William found Charles in the corridor and kept his voice low. He said the Queen had not corrected George. She had degraded him before people trained to remember every royal mistake. The prince warned that none of his children would face such hostility. Charles heard the threat beneath the restraint and knew his son meant it. Charles entered a retiring room and removed his glasses. A retiring room is a chamber used by a royal between formal duties. The king pressed both hands against the desk and faced the truth. He had noticed Camilla's impatience around George, but dismissed it as irritation rather than resentment. George then asked Catherine whether he had truly embarrassed his grandfather. The question cut deeper than the insult. The boy was no longer wondering whether he had broken protocol. He was wondering whether Charles felt ashamed of him, and she knew that doubt could outlive the incident. Camilla sat alone in an antechamber, a waiting room beside the hall, and removed one glove finger by finger. She told an attendant she would not apologize for preparing an heir for reality. Yet her rigid calm revealed something darker. George's importance reminded her that attention was moving toward William's family. A courtier approached Charles with a household note. He explained that the attack had not been spontaneous. Camilla had raised concerns about George earlier and requested authority to correct him during official gatherings. The humiliation inside the court had lasted less than a minute, but its true origin reached back to a private ceremony where Camilla first decided that George had become a threat to her authority. The explosion at Windsor did not begin with George stepping forward too soon. It began weeks earlier, during a private investiture rehearsal that should have been forgotten by sunset. A misplaced chair, an innocent question, and a room full of courtiers laughing warmly at the young prince created a wound Camilla refused to acknowledge. From that afternoon onward, every gesture involving George became personal, and one quiet misunderstanding hardened into a confrontation waiting for its moment. Camilla grew restless, as discussions focused on William, Catherine, and their children. Each meeting seemed to lean toward the future, as though Charles's reign were only a bridge to the next generation. That fear mattered because the Queen Consort had spent years earning a place inside an institution that resisted her, and George's growing importance made that place feel less secure. Catherine believed preparation should never crush childhood. She introduced duty gently, while Camilla favored immediate discipline and obedience. Charles saw the conflict but refused to choose between them, hoping irritation would fade before it became danger. George entered St. George's Hall for a private investiture rehearsal, a practice session for a ceremony in which honors are formally presented. He noticed that his chair stood behind Camilla's and politely asked whether he should sit nearer William. A courtier checked the plan, admitted an administrative mistake, and moved the seat beside the prince. George thanked the official with such careful formality that several courtiers smiled. Camilla heard approval in their laughter. She watched the boy take his new place and felt the room had celebrated her being pushed aside. Camilla confronted Catherine after the rehearsal. She said George was being taught to expect deference before earning it. The princess answered that her son had only asked a respectful question, but the queen heard defiance instead of reassurance. Camilla carried the grievance to Charles that evening. As the king closed a red dispatch box, a locked case used for official papers, she warned that confidence could become entitlement. He dismissed her concern and said she was inventing rivalry where none existed. Camilla then gave the master of the household, the senior official overseeing palace operations, an instruction to alert her whenever George broke protocol. That request created a pattern of observation disguised as discipline. Catherine discovered the truth after the Windsor attack, when a courtier handed her a dated memorandum recording the request. She carried it into the room where William and Charles waited. Before she could speak, Camilla entered uninvited and closed the door. With the document lying between them and George's humiliation still fresh, the royal family could no longer hide behind protocol. The confrontation had finally become personal. The door closed, the aides disappeared, and 5 people remained inside the king's private drawing room: Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine, and the silence created by a child's humiliation. There were no cameras, no prepared statements, and no courtiers left to soften the truth. When Catherine placed the memorandum on the table, Camilla did not deny it. She looked directly at the king and admitted that she had been watching George because Charles had refused to control his own family. Charles ordered attendants out. William stayed beside Catherine, while Camilla remained near the door, refusing to sit as though the family had summoned her for judgment. The private drawing room, a smaller chamber used for confidential meetings, now held more danger because no ceremony remained to restrain them. Catherine pushed the memorandum toward the king. She explained that household officials had been asked to record George's mistakes in protocol, the formal rules governing royal conduct. The princess called it surveillance of a child, not guidance, and Camilla answered without apology. Camilla insisted George would one day carry constitutional responsibility, meaning duties tied to the crown and the nation. She said William and Catherine surrounded him with praise, then treated criticism as cruelty. The queen claimed she had done what his parents feared to do. William stepped forward. He said his son's preparation belonged to him and Catherine, not to anyone seeking control through humiliation. The prince declared that Camilla would have no private access to George. Charles lifted the memorandum and held it before her. He asked whether she had planned the confrontation. Camilla admitted she intended to correct the boy, but had not expected him to appear so fragile. Catherine's expression hardened. She told the queen consort that humiliating a child before strangers did not expose weakness in George. It exposed weakness in the adult who needed an audience. Camilla turned on Charles and accused him of letting guilt about his past weaken every decision involving William's family. The king knocked a chair aside. He warned her never to use his history as a weapon against his grandson. Charles removed Camilla from all events involving George until further notice. She asked whether he was choosing William's household over his wife. The monarch answered that she had made that choice when she attacked a child publicly. Camilla left without another word. William asked whether the restriction was temporary. Charles stared at the closed door and admitted he no longer knew whether his marriage and kingship could survive the same decision. Yet emotional fury alone could not determine Camilla's future. By morning, the machinery of the monarchy would turn Charles's outburst into a formal struggle over power. By sunrise, the shouting had ended, but the consequences had only begun. Charles sat alone at his desk, with 3 documents placed before him, each capable of changing Camilla's place within the royal household. One limited her access to the Wales children. Another removed her influence over youth-related engagements. The third demanded something far more painful, a written acknowledgement that the queen consort had crossed a line the crown itself could not defend. Charles lifted his pen, then lowered it again. A royal household is the team of aides, officials, and staff who organize the monarch's work and family duties. His authority allowed him to change access, ceremonial roles, and internal responsibilities. But it did not make the choice painless. Every signature would weaken the woman he had defended for decades. William entered without anger. That calm made his warning harder to dismiss. As heir, the person next in line to the throne, and as George's father, he could remove his son from any event he judged unsafe. Such a decision would cancel appearances, expose division, and force the palace to explain why the future king was absent. William told Charles that George would attend no function involving Camilla unless either parent remained beside him. The prince did not threaten or raise his voice. He simply set a boundary, and the king understood that no appeal to duty would move it. Charles remembered Camilla standing beside him through years of hostility. Then George's lowered head returned to his mind. Loyalty to his wife now collided with responsibility to his grandson, and neither love nor rank could erase that fact. Camilla sent a handwritten note before the documents were signed. She asked Charles to meet privately and hear her explanation. He read the first line, folded the page, and placed it beneath the unsigned directive. Catherine then surprised William. She urged him not to demand total removal, arguing that George needed protection, without learning that power existed only to destroy opponents. The princess wanted firm consequences, not revenge, because her son would remember how the adults behaved after his pain. Charles finally signed. The directive, a formal written instruction carrying the king's authority, suspended Camilla from engagements involving the Wales children and removed her from a youth leadership ceremony. Camilla received the revised program minutes later. She circled the empty space where her name had been, summoned her private secretary, and declared that she would not disappear without explaining why Charles had truly turned against her. The king had used his authority to protect George, but Camilla's refusal to accept silence meant the family's private rupture was about to spread through every corridor of the palace. The revised court program arrived without explanation, yet everyone understood what the missing name meant. Camilla had been removed from the youth ceremony. George's schedule had been altered, and 2 royal households were suddenly communicating through written instructions instead of conversation. Behind polished doors, staff members lowered their voices and chose their loyalties. For the first time, the conflict was no longer contained within one furious family. The entire palace had entered the fracture. Palace planners acted immediately. Camilla's youth engagements were reassigned, her appearance beside George was cancelled, and officials began separating her movements from the Wales family. A royal household is the group of aides and staff serving a senior royal. Now 2 such households were protecting different loyalties, and every timetable carried the tension. Charles's long-serving advisors defended the king's authority. Camilla's aides saw punishment without a public hearing. The divide mattered because palace staff control access, schedules, and information. Once they began choosing sides, private pain could no longer remain private. One careless leak could damage the monarchy, while one defensive statement could make reconciliation impossible, before the family had even understood what George truly needed from them for years. Camilla turned the revised pages slowly in her room. When she reached the ceremony and found her name gone, she removed her glasses and whispered, "He has made me invisible." She then requested dinner with Charles, but an equerry, an officer who carries messages for a royal, returned with his refusal. The king would spend the evening with George. George overheard staff discussing cancelled appearances and asked William whether everything was his fault. The prince knelt before his son and said adults were responsible for their choices, not children. He repeated it until the boy finally looked at him. Camilla dictated a statement defending strict royal standards. Her private secretary warned that releasing it would expose the confrontation and force the palace to confirm Charles's loss of control. She kept speaking until Anne arrived unexpectedly. Anne closed the door and warned Camilla that attacking William's parenting, or George's character, would turn a family dispute into permanent isolation. The Princess Royal, the monarch's senior working sister, spoke without softness because she understood the cost of public war. Camilla held the draft over the fireplace after Anne left. She tore it once, stopped, and locked the remaining pages inside a drawer. That night, George asked to speak with Charles alone. The king expected reassurance. Instead, his grandson entered carrying a request that could change everything. The adults had answered humiliation with restrictions and warnings. Yet the turning point would come from the one person whose voice they had barely allowed themselves to hear. When Prince George entered his grandfather's study, there were no advisors, parents, or palace officials beside him. Charles expected tears, anger, perhaps even a request never to see Camilla again. Instead, the young prince stood before the king's desk and asked for something no adult in the conflict had considered. He did not want revenge. He wanted Camilla to understand exactly what her words had done, and he wanted to tell her himself without an entire court watching. George asked William and Catherine to remain outside. Charles closed the study door, moved away from his desk, and sat beside his grandson, rather than across from him. The study, a private room used for work and conversation, became the place where the boy did not have to perform for anyone. George spoke carefully. Camilla's anger had frightened him, but her claim that he had embarrassed Charles hurt more. For several hours, he believed his grandfather might secretly agree with her. The confession struck the king with greater force than any public criticism. Charles admitted his failure. He told George that he had noticed the hostility, but avoided confronting it, hoping tension would disappear. The monarch understood now that silence had protected the conflict, not the child. George rejected revenge. He did not want Camilla removed from everything because of him. He wanted one promise: she must never speak to Charlotte or Louis in the same cruel way. His concern for his siblings revealed a courage none of the adults had shown in their struggle. Charles asked whether he would meet her. George hesitated, pressed his hands together, and agreed only if his grandfather remained nearby and allowed him to speak first. Camilla arrived expecting a final decree, a binding order issued under royal authority. She stopped when she saw the boy seated beside Charles. The queen consort understood that the child she had humiliated had requested this meeting. George told her that correction would have been easier in private. He said she had made him feel small so she could appear powerful before the court. Camilla stiffened, then lowered her eyes. Camilla admitted the truth. Her anger had not been about his mistake. It came from feeling displaced whenever the family looked toward the future. She apologized without excuse, and George accepted her words without pretending the wound had vanished. Charles called the apology a beginning, not a solution. He told Camilla she must repeat it before William and Catherine, while the palace prepared to address her unexplained absence. George had achieved what royal authority could not. He forced the truth into the room, but outside the palace walls, the world had already formed its own judgment. The palace released no account of the confrontation, yet silence could not conceal the empty chair beside King Charles at the youth leadership ceremony. Camilla's name had disappeared from the program. George entered between his parents, and the king remained visibly close to his grandson throughout the event. Within minutes, one photograph captured everything the monarchy refused to say: Charles resting a protective hand on George's shoulder, while Camilla's place remained vacant. Charles heard the first explanation and rejected its weakness. Palace communications called the change an internal scheduling adjustment, meaning an alteration made by royal staff rather than a public decision. The claim failed because Camilla had been announced as a central participant only days earlier, and two joint engagements involving the Wales family had also vanished. Broadcasters joined the details together. One presenter described the absence as evidence of a serious royal rupture, not illness or coincidence. William watched the coverage with advisors and refused demands for a dramatic public attack. The prince said George's dignity would not be protected by turning his pain into entertainment. Morning brought the image that defined everything. A major London newspaper placed the empty ceremonial chair across its front page beneath the headline, "The Seat That Shook the Palace." Beside it appeared Charles with one hand resting protectively on George's shoulder, a gesture the public understood without explanation. Visitors gathered outside Windsor Castle, carrying handwritten cards for the boy. Windsor Castle is a royal residence used for official duties and private family life. One card reading, "Kindness is strength, George," was photographed near the gate and became the clearest symbol of public sympathy. Charles studied the front page at breakfast. The king realized strangers had identified the emotional truth, even without knowing every word spoken inside the court. Camilla reached the same conclusion alone as a broadcaster described the crisis as a struggle between inherited authority and the protection of a child. She switched off the television when the empty chair appeared again. Charles rejected another proposal to blame confusion. He authorized a carefully worded palace statement confirming that family boundaries had been crossed and that steps were taken to safeguard the younger royals. The monarch understood that honesty carried risk, but another false explanation would deepen the damage. Camilla then signed a private letter addressed to George. She asked Charles for permission to include one sentence admitting her failure publicly. He read it twice before placing it beside the unfinished statement. For once, silence could no longer serve royal survival. The court had witnessed the offense, the family had endured the fallout, and the public had delivered its judgment. Only the final terms of accountability remained. The final verdict did not arrive through exile, revenge, or another furious confrontation. It came through a short palace statement, a private apology, and the quiet decision of a young prince not to answer humiliation with cruelty. Charles had lost control before the court, but in the aftermath he discovered a harder form of authority. Admitting that silence had enabled harm, protecting George without exploiting him, and requiring Camilla to accept consequences without stripping her of human dignity. Charles authorized the final palace statement himself. It confirmed that an inappropriate exchange had occurred during a private court gathering, that the king had intervened immediately, and that new boundaries now protected the Wales children. A palace statement is an official message issued in the monarch's name, and this one mattered because it refused to hide pain behind vague language. Camilla added one sentence with Charles's approval. She accepted that her words toward George were unacceptable and had caused harm no rule of royal protocol could justify. Protocol means the formal code guiding royal conduct, but the queen consort now admitted that rules could never excuse cruelty. Camilla then met William, Catherine, George, and Charles in a small sitting room. She faced the parents first, confessed that resentment had shaped her judgment, and apologized for using their son to express fears she had refused to confront honestly. Catherine accepted the apology, without offering instant closeness. She told Camilla that forgiveness did not erase boundaries, and trust would return only through conduct. William agreed. The prince confirmed that supervision around George, Charlotte, and Louis would remain because access to his children was a privilege governed by their safety. Camilla remained queen consort, but she surrendered any role in preparing the younger royals and withdrew from several youth-focused duties. The consequence was visible, measured, and permanent. Charles later sat alone with George and admitted that anger had not restored order. Listening had. The king understood that family loyalty became dangerous when it was used to excuse harm. Weeks later, George returned to court and completed the ceremonial presentation he had once interrupted. Charles watched with pride, Catherine with quiet relief, and William with certainty that his son's confidence had survived. That victory gave the crown a future built not on fear, but on restraint, responsibility, compassion, and trust. The court remembered the night Charles lost control, but history would remember something greater. Prince George faced humiliation without becoming bitter, and through his courage, the monarchy chose protection over pride, accountability over silence, and humanity over power. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.